The film adaptation of It Ends With Us was supposed to be a sure thing, a slam dunk at the box office, an easy win. Instead, it unraveled into lawsuits, controversy, and online drama. But if you look a little closer, this story reveals deeper truths about our culture, our media, and ourselves. It shines a light on the power of fandom, the evolving conversations around toxic masculinity and feminism, the manipulation of public perception, the public battles for control over the narrative, and the risks of building a brand around ideology. In part one, we covered the rise of Colleen Hoover and her fandom, Book Talk's influence on the literary industry and Hoover's books, and Justin Baldoni's rise to fame and how addressing toxic masculinity became a big part of his brand. In part two, we covered Blake Lively's rise to fame and how feminist ideology became a big part of her brand, the breakdown of public perception during the film's production, and the subsequent press tour that resulted in criticisms reaching a fever pitch. Ultimately, the backlash led to Blake Lively filing her first formal complaint with the California Civil Rights Department. The timeline during the months of December 2024 and January 2025 are crucial to understanding the intricacies of what was happening behind the scenes of this increasingly public fallout. The negative optics of the press tour resulted in many news outlets and online sleuths reporting on the It Ends With Us movie, and not always in a good way. This would result in the very public battle to control the narrative. On December 20th, 2024, Lively filed a complaint with the California Civil Rights Department. In it, she alleged sexual harassment, failure to investigate, and retaliation, among other damages, against Baldoni, Wayfair Studios, other Wayfair executives, and their public relations team. The next day, on December 21st, 2024, the New York Times published a piece entitled "We Can Bury Anyone: Inside a Hollywood Smear Machine" that reported on Lively's complaint. On December 31st, 2024, 10 days after that article was published, Baldoni responded with a lawsuit against the New York Times, alleging libel, among other damages. The same day, on December 31st, 2024, Lively upgraded her complaint to an official lawsuit against Baldoni, Wayfair Studios, other Wayfair executives, and Wayfair's PR team, alleging sexual harassment, retaliation, and emotional distress, among other damages. On January 16, 2025, Baldoni filed another lawsuit, this time against Lively, Ryan Reynolds, and Lively's PR team, alleging defamation, extortion, and invasion of privacy. Through these filings, we get a glimpse into the inner workings of the film's production, from its inception to completion, and the subsequent press tour. We also see how both sides seemingly fought for narrative control behind the scenes, and what ultimately emerged as the main points of contention. Both Lively and Baldoni accuse each other of multiple attempts to manipulate public perception, and they both provide alleged evidence of what they believe to be smear campaigns. In an effort to keep things organized, the alleged evidence will be discussed in order of publication date. On August 9, 2024, the Daily Mail published an article titled "Truth Behind Why Blake Lively is Feuding with Justin Baldoni Revealed." Purporting to have exclusive information in it, the piece says in part, quote, "Insiders have revealed the concerning truth about the tensions, telling DailyMail.com that Blake and Justin clashed over his dismissive attitude to her input while they were filming scenes that involved abuse. The source claimed Justin almost became the character in the sense that some women on set felt he was borderline abusive to them and that he was unprofessional and unapologetic." Close quote. Baldoni asserts in his filing against Lively that this article had information in it that was provided to the reporter from Lively's publicist, Leslie Sloan. This alleged conversation between the reporter and Sloan would have taken place during a supposed truce between both sides. In the filing, Baldoni's counsel writes, quote, "At 10:11 a.m. on August 8, 2024, Nathan and Sloan reached an agreement whereby neither would communicate directly with a reporter prior to informing the other. Just 9 minutes later, Sloan breached her agreement with Nathan by engaging with a reporter at the Daily Mail. Close quote. In an effort to provide evidence of this claim, a text exchange between Leslie Sloan and Melissa Nathan, Baldoni's publicist, is shared. In the messages, we see Nathan speaking to Sloan, saying, quote, "I am not doing one thing without speaking to you. I'm not answering one email about this situation. I've told everyone not to do one thing /plant/seed, even speak to one reporter, even on background." Close quote. Sloan replies, quote, "Me either." Close quote. We then see the text exchange between Sloan and the Daily Mail reporter that supposedly takes place 9 minutes after the conversation with Nathan, where Sloan apparently tells the reporter, quote, "You have it all wrong. Your reports are so wrong. The whole cast doesn't like Justin. Nothing to do with Blake." Close quote. While the exact words being said in the text do not end up in the final article, Baldoni still asserts that this was an effort to damage his reputation while the other side wasn't looking. In the filing, they continue, quote, "It is evident that Sloan never intended to honor her agreement with Nathan. Instead, she exploited the arrangement to gain a strategic advantage in the media." Close quote. However, on the same day, August 9th, 2024, Page 6 published an article entitled "Truth Behind It Ends With Us Feud Rumors. Justin Baldoni Made Blake Lively Uncomfortable, Sources Say." In the article, they write about the feud, saying, quote, "One industry source claimed that Baldoni, who also directed the movie, created an extremely difficult atmosphere behind the scenes for the entire cast. It's not just Blake," added the industry source. "None of the cast enjoyed working with Justin. They certainly didn't talk to him at the premiere." Sources who have worked with Baldoni were quick to say the father of two would never intentionally set out to make any of his actors feel unsupported. Close quote. Overall, the article is mostly negative for Baldoni, with a few positive remarks here and there to apparently give the content some balance. But interestingly, this article is referenced in Lively's filing, where she argues that Baldoni's PR team had a hand in this article behind the scenes. Curiously, the author of that Page 6 article is Sarah Nathan, who is Melissa Nathan's sister. Lively alleges that Melissa Nathan and Jennifer Abel, both PR executives for Baldoni, discussed the creation of this article via texts. In Lively's filing, her counsel writes, quote, "On August 9th, 2024, Miss Nathan indicated to Miss Abel that she was on the phone with her sister, Sarah Nathan, a journalist at the New York Post and contributor to Page 6, and remarked that Mr. Baldoni's religion should be taken out from media coverage." Later that same day, Miss Nathan texts Mrs. Abel a link to an article on Page 6 by Sarah Nathan entitled "Truth Behind It Ends With Us Feud Rumors. Justin Baldoni Made Blake Lively Uncomfortable, Sources Say," stating, quote, "I knew she would keep uncomfortable." Close quote. Baldoni's religion is referenced in the final article, despite Melissa Nathan's apparent request. But the connection between this particular reporter and Baldoni's PR team, along with the text messages, does certainly raise eyebrows. One can only speculate how involved the PR team was in the creation of this article, and how much of their input ended up in the final piece. On August 13th, 2024, another article was published to Page 6 by the same reporter, Sarah Nathan, entitled "Blake Lively Approved Final Cut of It Ends With Us Amid Feud Rumors with Co-Star Director Justin Baldoni." In it, Nathan writes in part, quote, "The actress helped shape the version moviegoers are seeing on the big screen, as she felt it was important to bring more feminine touches to the end result," multiple sources said. A studio insider told Page 6, "There were 2 edits and the studio went with a more feminine edit." Close quote. Lively asserts in her filing that Baldoni's PR team drafted this article, saying, quote, "On August 13th, 2024, various text messages were exchanged between Miss Abel and the journalist Sarah Nathan. These messages consisted of drafts of a story outlining Miss Lively's role in making final cuts to the film. The language contained in the article is almost a verbatim copy of the language exchanged between Sarah Nathan and Miss Abel. via text and reflects multiple of Miss Abel's revisions to Sarah Nathan's original proposed draft. Tag publicly shared this article on one or more social media platforms, including Reddit, prompting various negative comments in relation to Miss Lively and her husband, and the narrative that Miss Lively steamrolled or bulldozed Mr. Baldoni and the film for her own personal gain. Close quote. This article also mentions that Lively was a producer on the project, and her husband wrote one of the most important scenes. It's noted that the alleged revisions that Miss Abel apparently provided don't seem to be in the filing, so it's hard to know for sure if this page 6 article was revised to include direct input from Abel. On August 16, 2024, an article was published to Daily Mail entitled, "Is Blake Lively Set to be Cancelled?" Largely critical of Lively, the authors write in part about some of the perceived press tour blunders, including a Q&A session Lively participated in with Colleen Hoover and fellow castmates Jenny Slate and Isabella Ferrer. Interestingly, Lively's counsel wrote in her original filing that Jennifer Abel and Melissa Nathan shared texts over this article, writing, quote, "Miss Abel stated, 'You really outdid yourself with this piece,' and Miss Nathan responded, 'That's why you hired me, right? I'm the best.'" Close quote. However, this exchange would later turn up in Baldoni's filing, where he accused Lively and her team of purposely omitting the context of this conversation between Abel and Nathan to make it look nefarious when really it was not. When Lively amended her lawsuit, the mention of this article and the text exchange were removed entirely. Another interesting allegation that comes up in Lively's filing is that Baldoni attempted to get ahead of the HR complaints against him by doing interviews with the press highlighting his ADHD diagnosis. She asserts that he did a number of interviews in early December 2024, specifically highlighting this topic, with the idea that if the HR complaints ever came to light in the future, he would have this to fall back on to explain himself. In Lively's filing, they say, quote, "Mr. Baldoni strategized with his publicist, Miss Abel, about various ways in which they might cover up or explain away his on-set misconduct. On June 24, 2024, Mr. Baldoni proposed an offensive move showing his neurodivergence and some of the attributes that come with it, to explain that anything that he had been accused of was social awkwardness and impulsive speech." Close quote. A look at the news cycle around Baldoni in December 2024 does turn up a variety of articles detailing Baldoni's newly diagnosed ADHD. Whether this was an attempt to get ahead of the complaints is not clear. But perhaps no article created more controversy in the alleged public manipulation accusations than the New York Times article, "We Can Bury Anyone Inside a Hollywood Smear Machine." Published on December 21, 2024, it relied heavily on the information provided in Lively's original complaint with the California Civil Rights Department, the document that was filed merely 1 day prior. Authors Megan Twohey, Mike McIntyre, and Julie Tate are credited with writing the piece. They claim that in addition to the filing, they also reviewed other documents, saying in part, quote, "Her filing includes excerpts from thousands of pages of text messages and emails that she obtained through a subpoena. These and other documents were reviewed by the New York Times." Close quote. The article references text exchanges that were provided in the complaint, mostly between Melissa Nathan and Jennifer Abel, of course highlighting the infamous "You know we can bury anyone" message from Nathan. The article largely follows Lively's account of the story, giving very little criticism or pushback on her detailing of events. At one point, they write, quote, "The effort to tarnish Miss Lively appears to have paid off. Within days of the film's release, the negative media coverage and commentary became an unusually high percentage of her online presence, according to a forensic review she sought from a brand marketing consultant." Close quote. Lively does mention this in her original complaint, showing charts apparently provided to her from this brand marketing consultant. In the charts, it does show a net negative result in the online conversations around Lively, with drastically low results starting in August 2024, shortly after the film premiered and the press tour began. But even still, There are a few instances in the article where the authors write as if there's no room for debate on whether this smear campaign took place or not. They also seem to largely empathize with Lively and her situation, writing things like, quote, Miss Lively experienced the biggest reputational hit of her career. Mr. Baldoni, by contrast, emerged largely unscathed. An online backlash against Miss Lively was underway. It is impossible to know how much of the negative publicity was seeded by Miss Nathan, Mr. Wallace, and their team, and how much they noticed and amplified. Close quote. To be fair, there are attempts to have some balance to the content. They do include a statement from Baldoni's lawyer, Brian Friedman, where he completely denies the allegations. Despite this, Baldoni sued the New York Times over this article, and it was in fact the first lawsuit he would file in this saga. In his filing against the publication, Baldoni's counsel explained in part, quote, Despite its claim to have reviewed these along with other documents, the Times relied almost entirely on Lively's unverified and self-serving narrative, lifting it nearly verbatim while disregarding an abundance of evidence that contradicted her claims and exposed her true motives. It is really apparent that the Times had been quietly working in concert with Lively's team for weeks or months. Close quote. The timing of the article is a little peculiar. It is a long piece, around 4,000 words, and would have taken considerable research and time to execute, especially given the claim that they reviewed the original complaint along with other documents. How they were able to publish this the very next day after the filing was made is interesting. It does, after all, rely heavily on the contents of the complaint. It stands to reason that they had access to it beforehand, and that's how the timing could be possible. Whether or not they worked together, though, as alleged by Baldoni, is up for debate. Not surprisingly, this article surfaced in Baldoni's lawsuit against Lively as well. He asserts that Lively's move to file the complaint was in and of itself an attempt by her to control the narrative. They write, quote, It further appears that Lively worked for months with the equally powerful New York Times to prepare a false and damaging narrative to deploy against plaintiffs. Lively delivered the CRD complaint to plaintiffs over the Christmas holiday, and rather than promptly file a lawsuit, Lively, on information and belief, leaked the typically private CRD complaint to the public, utilizing the New York Times as a conduit for her revenge. Lively then waited several days to file suit against plaintiffs. It would seem to be a desperate move after the public questioned why she had never filed a civil lawsuit. On information and belief, Lively never intended to file a civil lawsuit, which would have triggered plaintiffs' right to discovery. By the time Lively actually filed a lawsuit against plaintiffs, the damage to plaintiffs was done. Make no mistake, these actions were deliberate. Close quote. The impact of the article was measurable for Baldoni. First, he was dropped by his talent agent, William Morris Endeavor. Whether this was a direct result of the article is unknown. News reports claim that he was dropped the morning of December 21st, which is the same day that the article was published. But no representative from the agency has directly confirmed that his termination was due to the article. Despite this, even the New York Times recognized the sequence of events. They write in part, quote, Mr. Baldoni, by contrast, emerged largely unscathed. This month, he was honored at a star-studded event celebrating men who elevate women, combat gender-based violence, and promote gender equality worldwide. On Saturday, however, after this article was published, the talent agency William Morris Endeavor stopped representing Mr. Baldoni. Close quote. The star-studded event they are talking about was hosted by Vital Voices on December 9, 2024. The organization honored Baldoni with their Voices of Solidarity Award, which is given to remarkable men who have shown courage and compassion in advocating on behalf of women and girls. On December 23rd, 2 days after the New York Times article, Vital Voices rescinded the award. In a statement on their website, they say in part, quote, On Saturday, December 21st, we learned through news reports about a lawsuit brought by Blake Lively against Mr. Baldoni, his publicists, and others that is disturbing and alleges abhorrent conduct. The communications among Mr. Baldoni and his publicists included in the lawsuit and the PR effort they indicate are alone contrary to the values of Vital Voices and the spirit of the award. We have notified Mr. Baldoni that we have rescinded this award. Close quote. Any other fallout as a result of this article is unknown at this time, but it is ironic that there has been some measurable negative impact on Baldoni after its publication in a piece that claimed he emerged largely unscathed. People have long speculated that the media is sometimes used as a tool of manipulation, and these articles and filings show how that might play out in real life, how an invisible hand behind the scenes can shape the information disseminated to the public. We rarely get a window into the relationship between PR and media companies, and this story gives us one. This doesn't necessarily mean that any single article is true or false on its face, but it does show how stories can be shaped before publication. The alleged backroom discussions between PR executives and reporters to shape what the public ultimately sees are a matter of public concern. The media plays a vital role in our society, and undisclosed influence by parties with an agenda can erode trust. Communities depend on independent, verifiable reporting, and media literacy is becoming an invaluable skill. But the alleged smear campaigns weren't the only point of contention between Lively and Baldoni. There were a few other major disagreements between them that emerged through their respective filings. First of all, what was the feud actually over? What started the fallout? Blake alleged that it was over the fact that Baldoni and others behaved poorly on the film set, and retaliated against her because she moved to secure protections for herself and other castmates. She brought it to the attention of Sony, which was the distributor and co-financier of the film, and she alleges that this is what started the retaliation and eventual fallout. Baldoni alleges that Blake wanted to steal the movie from him and Wayfarer Studios, and she did so in a calculated and systematic process over the course of production and the press tour. Not only did she want full creative control of It Ends With Us, she wanted the sequel as well. He also argued that once public sentiment against her began to turn negative, she then sought to rebuild her reputation at the expense of himself and Wayfarer Studios. There was also the issue of how the film was marketed. Blake alleged in her filing that she and the other castmates followed the marketing plan laid out by Sony months prior to the film's release, and that they were contractually obligated to follow it. Quote, Miss Lively and fellow cast members promoted the film in accordance with the marketing plan created and delivered by the film's distributor, Sony. Miss Lively and other cast members were under a contractual obligation to engage in media, press, marketing activities, and render promotional services in accordance with the marketing plan. Close quote. In part 2, we discussed how Baldoni made a more lighthearted appearance in late July at a pop-up event designed as Lily Bloom's Flower Shop. Lively used this as evidence in her filing to show that even Baldoni was following the marketing plan laid out by Sony, which specifically directed the cast to, quote, focus more on Lily's strength and resilience, as opposed to describing the film as a story about domestic violence. Avoid talking about this film in a way that makes it feel sad or heavy, close quote. She then accused him of abruptly pivoting from this marketing plan in an effort to do damage control on his own reputation, and to perhaps explain why he wasn't interacting with the cast of his own movie during the press tour. They write in the filing, quote, in the days leading up to the film's release, Mr. Baldoni abruptly pivoted away from the film's marketing plan and the types of publicity activities in which he had previously participated. What the public did not know was that Mr. Baldoni and his team did so in an effort to explain why many of the film's cast and crew had unfollowed Mr. Baldoni on social media and were not appearing with him in public. Close quote. Baldoni alleged as part of Lively's effort to take control of the film, she also took control of the marketing. In his filing, he explains, quote, Lively eventually leveraged her power as a wealthy celebrity to wrest the reins from her co-star and the film's director, Baldoni, insisting on total control over every aspect of the film she could get her hands on, from wardrobe to marketing strategy to music, close quote. Even further, he alleged that it was always his goal to keep the very serious subject matter of the film at the forefront of the conversation, saying that very early on, he earmarked 1% of the film's proceeds to be donated to the organization No More, which he reached out to as early as September 2022. Quote, Baldoni's marketing plan, outlined in his initial proposal to Sony years prior, shared with Lively and communicated numerous times to both Sony and Lively, centered on a partnership with the organization No More. Wayfarer's collaboration with the organization began in 2022. Baldoni prioritized amplifying the voices of survivors of domestic violence, close quote. Then, of course, came the battle of ideologies. Lively heavily criticized Baldoni's carefully created brand in her amended complaint. She called into question how much of a feminist ally he really was. Quote, for years prior to the release of the film, Mr. Baldoni portrayed himself as a leader of the male feminist movement, writing books, hosting podcasts, and holding TED Talks on the topic. In reality, however, Mr. Baldoni's public persona is a stark contrast to his private behavior, which is replete with hypocrisy, misogyny, and retaliation, close quote. Even further, she accused Baldoni and his PR team of strategizing to plant stories that she weaponized feminism to get what she wants. In a document she provided in her filing called Scenario Planning, it is written, quote, our team can also explore planting stories about the weaponization of feminism and how people in Lively's circle, like Taylor Swift, have been accused of utilizing these tactics to bully into getting what they want, close quote. Baldoni largely avoids this conversation about feminism in his filings, addressing the scenario planning document only once, saying that it was an internal planning document and they never ultimately acted on it. After Baldoni filed his original lawsuit on January 16, 2025, he amended it on January 31, 2025. On February 1st, he launched a website called thelawsuitinfo.com, where he made his amended complaint and a timeline of relevant events available to the public. Lively amended her lawsuit on February 18, 2025. After battling it out mostly through the media, it was time for the court to enter the conversation. On June 9, 2025, both of Baldoni's lawsuits were dismissed. In the ruling provided by U.S. District Judge Lewis Liman, he explains the following in reference to the claim that Lively aimed to steal creative control of the film. Quote, regardless of the propriety of these actions, they do not constitute civil extortion under California law. California courts have recognized a claim for civil extortion in situations where a plaintiff gives a defendant money or property under threat and seeks to have it returned. However, the Wayfarer parties have not adequately alleged that Lively's threats were wrongful extortion rather than legally permissible hard bargaining or renegotiation of working conditions. Close quote. He also addressed the defamation allegation, saying that it must be dismissed due to Lively's CRD complaint being privileged and therefore did not qualify. Judge Liman writes, quote, the Wayfarer parties have not alleged that Lively is responsible for any statements other than the statements in her CRD complaint, which is privileged. Close quote. Since Lively's CRD complaint is privileged, that meant that the Times article, which largely reported on that filing, was protected by fair report privilege and could not be defamatory. Fair report privilege means that any reporting on an official proceeding is protected if it's fair and accurate. The court also found that Baldoni and Wayfarer parties failed to prove actual malice, which is also required for defamation against a public figure. Actual malice means that in order for a public figure to prove defamation, they must show that the outlet knew what they were reporting was false or seriously doubted it. Therefore, that case was also dismissed. In the ruling, Judge Liman adds, quote, the alleged facts indicate that the Times reviewed the available evidence and reported, perhaps in a dramatized manner, what it believed to have happened. The Times had no obvious motive to favor Lively's version of events. Though the article largely follows the narrative of the CRD complaint, it includes additional context favoring Baldoni. Close quote. Despite these dismissals, the judge did leave room for Baldoni to amend his claims and narrow them by June 2025. Ultimately, Baldoni did not take that offer. In a statement, Baldoni's lawyers said they would instead, quote, pursue additional legal options that are available to them, close quote. Shortly after the ruling, Lively posted to her Instagram stories about the decision, saying that the suit against her was defeated and sharing a list of organizations, most of whom fight for women's rights. The legal battle continues, with the most recent decision being that Baldoni's request to extend discovery to Taylor Swift was denied. Swift's lawyers said in a filing that she had no material role in the case. Lively's lawsuit still stands, and a trial date has been scheduled for March 9th, 2026. This story is rich with underlying themes, and the goal throughout this series has been to explore those undertones. What it reveals about fandom, our media, and our culture offers insights into how we interact with art, and how art interacts with capitalism. The saga ultimately serves as a cultural case study of what happens when chosen ideologies collide with narrative control and alleged attempts to manipulate the public. For now, the narratives remain in competition, and how it all ends remains to be seen.